So these are a few of the books that I've written. As people ask me how many, I haven't counted lately, 25 or so, 30. I don't know. And it's in a wide variety of things, from children's books to statistical analysis and data analytics. So I've had my toe in a lot of different things. Some of you may have heard me talk a couple of months ago or a few months ago, and then the topic then was called the ABCs of getting published. And so I'm not going to go through this slide much, but this is what I talked about: how to learn what to write, how to write, and how to submit. So it's really, in some ways, the business of writing. And so this time, what I want to cover are things that I didn't cover back then. Now, even in 2 talks, you can't cover it all. That's why people spend 2 or 3 years getting an MFA degree, because there's a lot of stuff that you could learn in terms of writing, and we're just hitting the tip of it. So what I didn't cover that I'm going to cover here is more about the craft of writing. And hopefully some of these things will be of interest to you. I know many of you that I see out there are accomplished writers already, but someone often told me that if you go to a talk and if you get one gem out of that talk that helps you move forward, then you've accomplished something. If we can just move forward a little bit every day, every week, then by the time months, years come around, we've made a lot of progress. So these are the 6 little things that I'm going to talk about here in the next little while. First of all, I call this, taking the mystery out of writing. So I needed to say something about mystery. And actually, I gave a similar talk last month to the Mystery Writers of America. And it was much more about this than what I'm going to talk about today. But I kept a little bit. And that is, to be a deliberate writer, this is number 1, to be a deliberate writer, you have to know the rules. You have to know what is expected of you when you're going to write, particularly in a genre. Now, a genre is, if you're writing a novel or something like that, there's mysteries, there's romance, there's horror, there's adventure, all of these kinds of things. There's also children's books, middle grade, YA. So all of these things have some rules that you need to figure out. And the way to do that is you would do a deep dive into those books and into the things that matter. Back in the 20s, when mystery writing was becoming popular, there was a group called the Detection Club, and all the famous British writers that you know about, Agatha Christie, Dorothy Sayers, they were all in this club, and they took an oath. And if I can get it to change here, come on, computer. All else fails, push the button. They took an oath. Here is the oath. Do you promise that your detectives shall well and truly detect the crimes presented to them, using those wits which it may please you to bestow upon them, and not placing reliance on or making use of divine revelation, feminine intuition, mumbo jumbo, jiggery pokery, coincidence, or the act of God? Now, it sounds sort of funny, but they really took this seriously. In other words, they wanted a mystery novel to have a basis to it. You, the reader, had to be able to solve the mystery if you were smart enough, and that's what they wanted. And so that was part 1. Then they say, do you promise to observe a seeming moderation in the use of gangs, conspiracies, death rays, ghosts, hypnotism, trapdoors, Chinamen, super criminals, and lunatics, and utterly and forever forswear mysterious poisons unknown to science? Now, we probably wouldn't word things like that today, but that was their oath. That was their actual oath. And I'm sure they probably changed it by today, but nevertheless, the point was you had to know what a mystery was, what was expected, what was not expected. So if you wrote a mystery novel with jiggery pokery in it, whatever that is, then it would not be accepted into this thing. So you need to know what you're writing. So don't let great writing be a mystery. Know what good writing looks like. Know the techniques of good writing. Know how other writers change bad drafts into sellable stories. If you're in this for very long, you're going to read where people say, in a nice way, your first draft is always a bunch of crap. basically, and you have to fix it. Writing is rewriting. So you want to deliberately learn good writing techniques. And that's a little bit, I hope we're going to have a gem or two that you can learn today. And again, my thing is not working here. I wish James was here to fix it for me. We're going to do a little exercise. All of you should have a piece of paper that looks like this. And again, if you came in late, there's a link on the website, dallaswriters.org, or you can just take a piece of paper and fold it two ways, and you can get this piece of paper. Now, I was taking a course in art just for the heck of it. I really wasn't taking a course. I was just listening to a guy talk about how he learned to become an artist. And he gave a similar example. This is what changed his life and helped him believe that he could be an artist. Because he tried art, he sort of wanted to do art, but he never could really get things right. So a teacher did this and it really changed his life. So what I'm going to do is have you take this, and we're going to go to 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I'm going to show you a very minuscule, a picture of, it's really not a picture, it's just a bunch of lines. And what I want you to do is have something hard enough to write on so you can do this. I'm going to show you a picture, and I want you to draw those lines. Now, don't think that we're not creating a picture. You're just copying lines, okay? That's the whole point. You're just copying lines that I'm going to put on the screen, and you're going to put it in this 1. Everybody see where that 1 is? So I'm going to give you 20 seconds. So do it quickly, and then we're going to go to the next one. Okay, on your mark, get set. Oops. Oops, we're not quite there yet. Before we get there, I'll back up to this. There it is. Okay, draw that. In section 1, as close as you can to what it looks like there. Doesn't look like anything in particular. Just draw it as quickly as you can. Don't pay attention to trying to get it to look like anything, because it's nothing. It's just sort of a random looking blob of stuff. All right, I'm going to go to number 2. Now find 2 on your, it's the upper left-hand corner. Find number 2. Put your hand over the one you just drew, because I don't want you to look at that one while you're drawing this one. And we're going to draw that one. This is in 2. Go up to 2 and draw this little blob of stuff. Just quickly, and just pay attention to the line. It's not a picture. It's not a picture. It's just lines. In box 2. Now, some of you artists out there are laughing at me, I can tell, but hold your laughter. Okay, we're going to go to 3. Find 3, which is the bottom left. And I'm going to show 3 and try to put your hand over the ones you've already drawn and draw number 3. There it is right there. Again, remember, all we're doing is copying these lines. We're not trying to make a picture out of anything. We're just copying the lines as we see them on the page. And this does have something to do with writing, as you're going to see in just a minute. Don't try too hard. Just emulate the lines and the little shaded areas as best you can. And now we're going to go to the last one, which is the upper right. And again, if you can, put your hand over the ones that you've already drawn so that you don't see them very well. And now draw the last one. The last one is in 4, which is the upper right-hand corner. Upper right-hand corner. Hopefully y'all, I was standing away from the light, but hopefully you could hear me. As I said, this was a exercise that I heard an artist talking about. That's why I was standing. That's why I was standing over here. Oh,
I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to keep that from showing up.
well, doing that. Click on the X there. Okay. I'll give you another 2 seconds. So as I was saying, an artist was showing this, and when he was talking about how this changed his perception of how he could become an artist, and I'm going to tell you why in just a minute. Has everyone had a good chance of doing that? Okay, now, if you would, your page probably looks something a little bit like this. Turn it over, and let's see what it looks like. This was what mine looked like. The point is, probably most of you can at least tell what it is. Okay, hopefully most of you can tell what it is. It's not a great drawing, but it's better than if I tried. The point that he was making was, most people, when they learn to draw, you look at a picture, you know how early on we look at a picture and we draw a blue thing up there and that's the sky, and a green thing down here and that's the earth, and things in the middle, because we think in our mind, I'm drawing a picture. But the point was, don't look at the picture, look at the details. Look at the details. Another artist friend of mine said that she learned to draw by learning to draw shadows. She didn't pay attention to anything else. She would first draw all the shadows. And that gave her the crux of what she was writing. Now, I know my artist friends out there, this may make no sense at all to you, because you may have learned in a different way, but it made a lot of sense to me, because the trick was to look, that he was describing, was to look at a picture in a different way. When you're looking at something that you're wanting to draw, don't try to emulate the whole picture at once. Find little details, draw an outline, draw a shadow, draw something like that. And the result, now I'm going to go back to that slide here if I can. Let's see if it'll let me do that. So there's a book by Anne Lamott called Bird by Bird, and it's a book that a lot of writers refer to as how they learn how to write. And what it talks about is that writing. So the story was the brother of Anne Lamott got a homework assignment where he was supposed to describe a bunch of birds in a report. And he sat there and oh, this is so difficult. It's so difficult. I can't do it. So too much. And his dad said, just take it bird by bird. And the point was, don't try to do everything at once. Just try to do one detail at a time. And if we can follow some simple rules in writing as well as drawing, and we can learn those tricks, then it might help us have better writing. So that's sort of the point that I'm trying to make today. And hopefully your drawing was, at least you could see what it's goofy. You could see at least what it was supposed to be. And hopefully that is what I'm trying to get across in terms of writing. So we're going to go through some little tidbits of information that are hopefully going to be helpful to you. And these aren't all of them, but I think these are some that will help you as you're writing. And the point is, which I'm going to make at the very end again, but I'll say it here at the beginning, is that when you write something, writing is rewriting. So maybe you write a story. You don't want to go through that story or even write the story at the same time, correcting everything as you go along, because you'll get stuck on the first sentence and you'll never get any further until you get that first sentence exactly correct. And then the second sentence doesn't fit the first. So don't do it that way. The point is, and I've heard many, many writers talk about this, is to do one thing at a time. So let's talk about one thing at a time. First of all, find an unforgettable voice. What is a writing voice and why is it important? So I like this definition from Owen Barfield. It's in a book called Poetic Diction. And he claims that great prose is not really poetry, but a poetic or lyrical way of writing. And this is an interesting description. Think about this. When words are selected and arranged in such a way that their meaning either arouses or is obviously intended to arouse aesthetic imagination, the result may be described as poetic diction. So can you imagine writing in such a way that you are hoping to arouse in this sense, their imagination, arouse the reader's imagination into seeing something or understanding something in your writing? That's what he calls poetic diction. And I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. And I have some examples here. And so the point is that voice is sort of like your writing signature. I bet a lot of you could pick up one page out of some book that you don't know what it is, read a few paragraphs and say, oh, that's, so, you know, my favorite writer, that's X or Y, or, you know, that's E.E. Cummings wrote that, or Ernest Hemingway wrote that. Because you know, if you've read enough of their writing, you can read one paragraph and you know, oh, that's them. They have developed their own writing style or signature. And when you do that, and you may, you know, probably none of us are going to be as famous as Hemingway, but I hope maybe some of you are. But still, if you're writing a book and people begin to read your page, your first paragraph, your first chapter, you're hoping to draw them in. You're hoping to create a voice for them that they're comfortable with and they know, and they're wanting to go the entire book or the entire story with you, because that voice is interesting. It's like, you know, people who sit down and tell stories, and you know, they're all, no matter what they talk about, their story is going to be great. You know, you hear about great actresses or actors who can read the phone book and make it sound interesting. That's the kind of voice you want to do. You want to create a recognizable voice that engages your fans, your devotees, and your buyers. Because if they read one book, guess what? If they like that book, what are they going to do? They're going to go look and see what other books you have, and they're going to buy those. So here's an example. You might be able to tell who wrote this, and I'll just read it. She was 20 or so, small and delicate, put together, but she looked durable. She wore pale blue slacks, and they looked well on her. She walked as if she was floating. Her hair was fine, tawny, wave cut, much shorter than the current faction of page boy tresses curled in at the bottom. Her eyes were slate gray and had almost no expression when they looked at me. She came over near me and smiled with her mouth, and she had a little sharp predatory teeth, as white as fresh orange pith and as shiny as porcelain. They glistened between her too thin and taut lips. Her face lacked color, and she didn't look too healthy. Now, you may not know who that is, but you can tell that that person had a voice. And it's from a very famous mystery novel called The Big Sleep from Raymond Chandler, who pretty much developed this in an entire genre of the kind of mystery. You're going to find that his influence has gone on for decades and still is out there. And so he had a voice. Let's look at another one. I think you'll know this one. It's those little figures, sir, in the middle of the table, the little china figures, 10 of them there were. I'll swear to that, 10 of them, sputters Mr. Rogers, as he realizes that after the deaths of Marston and Mrs. Rogers, the number had been reduced to 8. Who wrote that? Somebody should know that. Agatha Christie, of course. That was, and then there were none. So Agatha Christie had a voice. And again, if you read enough Agatha Christie, you can look at something like that and say, ah, that's who that is. Now, 99% of you should get this, I think. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Runnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on her neighbors. Yeah, that from what novel? This is actually the very beginning of Harry Potter. Can you see it setting a scene? Can you see her already developing her voice with this just one paragraph? And that's one reason why those novels are so successful. People get drawn into her voice and want to spend many novels and much money to get into that novel. All right. So we want to create an effective writing voice. Now, how do you do that? First of all, you want to create a real authentic voice. You don't want to have, well, I take this back. I mean, maybe you're a robot and you want to have a really strange cadence. Maybe you're Yoda. Yoda has a voice, and that's strange and weird to us. But mostly we want to have a real authentic voice. And oftentimes it comes from maybe our past. Maybe we're Texan, and so we want to write like a Texan, or maybe we grew up in the Bronx and we want to write like a Bronx, gangster or something like that. We don't want to duplicate anyone outright, but we can be inspired by other writers. And one way to do this, and I have some exercises through here, and we don't have time to do all these, but please take this and do it at home, because I think doing what I call deliberate exercises can help you really pull yourself up in terms of the craft of writing. So do this: take a scene from a story, rewrite the scene from your own, rewrite or your own novel, let's say. And if you don't have your own novel, do it for somebody else. Rewrite a scene in the style of several popular writers. Now, whoever you like, do you gain insight as to how their voice maybe improved your writing? So look at some writers that maybe it's a romance writer, maybe it's Danielle Steele, or maybe it's, I don't know, but you're used to their cadence and everything. Try to mimic that in a scene, just one scene. It may take you a while to do it, but you can gather information about how they did it, how they caused this scene to unfold. And if you can do that, then you're learning something about creating your own voice.
Alan,
Yes.
did you say to them that they can download your slides?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's out there to download, but you can send me an email and I'll be happy to send it to you.
Okay, or I can send it.
Or send an email to Patsy or somebody like that, and we'll get it to you. So more about creating your own style. So you want to define your voice, use language. Typically, this is how you do it. Now, I've talked about creating a language that is more like the choice of words, but there's also more than the choice of words in a sentence. There's the way you use words. So go back to poetic diction. It's a way of describing things that paints pictures in people's minds. And the way you do that is by using metaphors and similes, using picture words, and what I call texture within your writing. Now, hopefully most of you know what metaphors or similes are. That I should have something in my mind that says a metaphor is like, but I can't think of it. It's like telling somebody something without using the real words. It's an illustration of how some of them are. Picture words are words that you use that are better than he ran across the room. He stumbled across the room, things like that. Texture is making your writing, so many times we see writing from early writers, and it's a big blob of line after line of paragraph, or sometimes not even breaks in paragraphs. You want the texture of your writing to follow a rhythm as well. A long paragraph, a short paragraph, another short paragraph, a long, a medium. If it's an action scene, you want short sentences, bang, 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 bang. If it's a tranquil scene, you may want long sentences with oohs and ahs in the words. And if it's something going fast, you may want Ks and Zs and Xs. And you got to think about these things, the word choice that is going to give your story some texture. Here are some phrases from one of my favorite writers, J.R.R. Tolkien. Hopefully most of you have heard of him. And these are just some things I picked out of The Hobbit. This is from the first chapter, just the first chapter. He was swept away into dark lands under strange moons, Now that's just a simple phrase, but my, how he put that together. Just look at that and think about what it says. The shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. Can you see that happening? Deep-throated singings of the dwarfs in deep places of their ancient homes. So every time he talks about someone or describes someone, it's more than just saying the dwarves had beards. You know, it's much more than that. And he was talking about a noise that happened. It burst out like the whistle of an engine coming out of a tunnel. All of us can see that, you know, the whoa as it comes out of the tunnel. So a very, very picturesque way of saying things. Here's another one from a book called Promise Me by Harlan Corbin. Debbie Frankel, a brilliant girl who was a brilliant girl, a live wire, that spark plug who was always animated. A different person, that patrician lockjaw, the perfect nose, the hair parted by the gods, he stank, deservedly so, of the privilege and white shoes of a golfer's tan. He couldn't be more American casual if he tried. So all of she's describing people, not, you know, he was tall, he was wearing a gray suit, you know, not that, no. Something that really entices your mind. I'll skip this one because I know I'm going to deal it. Here's one by J. Alfred Prufrock. Now this isn't a novel, but it's a long poem, but I love some of the wordings he uses. The yellow fog that rubs its back against the window, upon the window. After the novels, after the teacups, after the skirts that trailed along the floor. He was talking about women coming out of a meeting. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. My wife could have said that if you're a coffee lover. So see how he takes metaphors and similes, he takes picture words, and he puts them together in such a way as Owen Barfield said, to create a vision in your mind, to almost create some sort of a motion as you're reading those words. I love this one from Longfellow. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints in the sands of time. Wow, what a great little phrase there, leaving footprints in the sands of time. So that's what I'm talking about by creating a voice. Think of ways, first of all, to use the words that mean something to you in terms of a vocabulary. You know, are you, again, you know, Brooklyn, Midwest, you know, whatever you are, and then sprinkle it with metaphors and similes, picture words, and texture. Now, let's improve a scene. So take a phrase like Jeremy ran across the room, and let's find ways to make that better, because this is what we see all the time. You know, we do critiques in here and other places, and we see the use of plain vanilla verbs. Jeremy ran across the room. Well, you can do better than that. How about Jeremy raced across the room like a dog chasing a squirrel? Jeremy waltzed across the room on a golden cloud. Jeremy crawled across the room, crawled across the cell on bloodied knees. All of those are much more picturesque about how Jeremy got from here to there, right? So every sentence can't be like this. You realize that. Every sentence can't be like it. But you should sprinkle these within your writing. Whenever you see a plain verb, think of, how can I make that more visual? How can I tell the audience? I mean, how can I show the audience rather than just telling them they walk across the room? Somebody think of another word, a way for Jeremy to get across the room. A sentence.
Can you hear us?
Type it in and Patsy will tell me what it is.
Can you hear us?
What if Jeremy saw
What if he flew?
his young daughter in distress across the room? How would Jeremy get across the room? Would he saunter across the room?
He flew across the room, Tara, on his
like a
heels.
rocket. You know, so think of that. You know, how would he, depending on what's going on in your story, make sure that the actions of your characters match what's going on. Another thing to do, you can look at these. Now, notice I'm going through these one by one. And the reason is, I mentioned this at the beginning. I mentioned it here in the middle. I'm going to mention it again, bird by bird. Look at your writing, go through there and say, I'm going to look at every verb. Are there any verbs that are plain? And can I make them better? Now I'm going to look at, or is there a metaphor I could put here? Now I'm going to look at adjectives. So I'm doing this on one reading. I'm looking at the whole thing, looking at only adjectives, only verbs in my entire reading. Just like when we were drawing this picture, we weren't paying attention to what the picture looked like. We were just trying to mimic the lines. We were only looking at one little piece at a time. In the same way, in your writing, look at one little piece at a time. And what's going to happen is you're going to pay much more attention to that piece of your puzzle that's going to make your writing better. Okay, so look at adjectives. Choose a scene in a writing project you're currently writing on. Look for places where you describe something using only adjectives like wonderful, terrible. Those are not wonderful adjectives. Those are terrible adjectives. They're telling how things are. What you want to do is replace what one writer called meek sentences with vivid descriptions, showing. So you're trying to move from telling to showing. And that's what you can do by replacing adjectives. And we're not going to do this exercise, but let me just quickly tell you what it is. This is an exercise from another writer, Damien Knight. He says, imagine a character who's sitting in this room and write a page or so of the description of this room without mentioning a character or referring any way or bearing in mind as you write that he just had a phone call notifying him of a promotion of a raise. So somebody just called you and said, oh, you're going to get a $10,000 raise. Now describe the room. How would you describe this room? Now, second dot, describe the same room you're sitting in, a person who has just got a phone call from a homicidal maniac saying, I'm coming to kill you. Can you see how you would differently describe the room? Maybe that's the way you're going to look around. What weapon can I find? So again, notice what your character is doing. And as you're moving that character through their actions, pay attention to where they are. And don't just say, the room had 2 doors, whatever. These are things that now are in your writer's toolbox. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to put things in your writer's toolbox. And one way to do that is to improve your voice through poetic diction.
Cindy on the chat, she had a sample.
Oh, okay. Tell us.
She said, Jeremy flew across the room, terror on his heels.
So that's a good one. Jeremy, and I think you can see that, so I don't have to repeat it. Okay, here's another scene. Now, another way to make your scene work better, and I'm showing you this, and I tell you, go look on something on TV and tell me if this is not what's happening. These are professional writers, and they use this all the time. Watch whatever show you're watching and notice how they do this. They plot their scene with a twist. So here's my original scene. Hey, Aiden, let's go to Bob's house and steal some beer. Great, let's do it. There's no tension in that. Let's do something. Okay, let's do it. There's no tension. So let's change that, make the scene better by putting some tension in it, by doing something reverse of what is beginning. Instead of his friend saying, great, I'm in, let's do something a little different. Hey, Aiden, let's go to the Bob's house and steal some beer. Not me. I'm not that stupid. I'll let you ride my Harley with Wilma snuggling behind me in her halter top and shorts. I'm in. Because see how so they twisted the scene. When any time, and you'll notice this in movies and books as well, when somebody suggests or let's go do something, notice how there's almost always a negative response. And then it's twisted into the positive response. It just makes the scene more interesting. Can you see how this would be more interesting to a reader than, okay, let's do it, So that's what I'm trying to get at. Again, that's sort of like texture within your, we're trying to make your writing more interesting. It has to do with voice, but it also just has to do with the texture and how you're writing things. Another thing to do, read through, okay, start at the top, read through and only check for tense changes. We see this all the time. People bring things for us to critique. We see tense changes within a paragraph or sometimes within a couple of paragraphs, whatever. If you don't know what that is, study it. So let's look at this sentence here. Lizzie hates how her parents talked and smiled and had fun Lizzie hates how her parents talk and smile and have fun. So Lizzie whacked her parents as they slept in bed. She loves how quiet the house is now. What's the matter with that paragraph? If you don't see it, you're seeing it. There's a tense change in there. In the first, Lizzie hates how her parent, that's present tense. But then she whacked her parent, that's past tense. And now she's back to present tense. And that's so easy to do if you're not paying attention. So if you go through your writing, pay attention, and you can see that it's past tense, typically whacked, ed, that's past tense. You can typically see those kinds of things in your writing. So go through your writing and change and look at that. Another common problem that we need to pay attention to, and I fall into this just like all of you, and we need to check it, go through and make sure, and that is to stay in the same point of view, POV, point of view. So here's another one. As they sat in the dark theater watching When Harry Met Sally, Camille hoped Jeremy was thinking of scooping her off her feet and making mad love to her. Jeremy crunched another handful of popcorn and wondered if the Rangers would make the playoffs this year. Now, that's sort of a funny juxtaposition there, but what's the matter? What's happening here? Can we tell? You're inside different people's heads. No, you don't do that. When you're writing a scene, now there's rules and sometimes you can break rules, but mostly you don't want to do what's called head hopping. That's my little picture up there. It's head hopping. And I hear some echoing back there. Patsy, it's causing an echo. Can you turn the volume off?
I turned it off.
Okay. So in the first one, we're in Camille's head. And the second we're in Jeremy's head. So don't do that. It's very common. We need to watch out for that. Again, go through your entire manuscript. Don't try to get all these things. You can't look at a paragraph and say, oh, what about POV? What about it? What about verbs? What about that? No, you're going to forget all those. Again, go through it one at a time. Well, which POV is best then? And I can't tell you that because it's different for different kinds of writing, but oftentimes what is suggested, don't have to rewrite an entire book, but take a chapter, take the first chapter, write it in third person. And there's two kinds of third person, at least. There's one called close third person, which means you're in third person. In other words, you're watching the scene, but you can only see what your main character is seeing. There's an omniscient third person. Tolkien wrote an omniscient third person. He could see other things going on. His narrator could see other people doing things. That's uncommon nowadays. If you're in third person, it's almost always omniscient, close to third person. First person is I. I saw this, and you can only have things that I saw. You can't tell me what Billy saw because you're not in his head. You can only tell me what I saw. And second person is even weirder. You can only say, you should see this. You should do that. There are books. In fact, do you know the book called Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus? That's in second person if you look at it, because you're talking to the people. I think that's right. So test which POV works for you. Write a paragraph or two, write a scene and say, oh, it really hops out. A lot of times when you're in first person, it builds the character. You understand the character more. And in third person, oftentimes you understand the plot more. And so if you're in third person, you have to pay attention to the character. If you're in first person, you have to pay more attention to the plot to make it work. So study the masters, take a scene from your favorite book and rewrite it using various POVs. Here's another one. Write a scene verbatim if you don't want to write in your book. Mark all the verbs in yellow, all the adjectives in blue, all the adverbs, if any, in pink, and note what POV is in. So take a chapter of something that you like and drill down into it with all of these and see what they did. And if it's a good novel, probably they follow the rules. Of course, not everyone follows the rules, and sometimes breaking the rules is good. Make your voice consistent with content and character. So here's again something that you might see show up. Farmer Jake spit out a wad of chewing tobacco and said, "Them there cotton candy clouds give the impression of wafting across the horizon and bring an expectation of precipitation." Would he really say that? So it's really so you have Farmer Jake or whoever it is, but he's talking like some guy, it's like Green Acres or something, talking about like a guy maybe from Manhattan. So you don't want to have out of place voice. Make sure you're not doing that. Another thing to watch out for is something called purple prose, which means that you use too many big words. You use words that are out of context to, a person, a little kid, 5 years old, wouldn't use the word, wafting across the horizon. They wouldn't say that. And so it disrupts the narrative and takes the reader out of the moment. You want to make sure you never take the reader outside of the moment. And by using strange words or purple prose, as people call it, you have the probability that somebody's going to say, "What is he saying there?" And that takes them out of the scene. You want them in the scene. You want your writing to flow in such a way that they're drawn into the scene. They don't have to think, really, except for reading. You want them drawn into that scene and not shoved out by some strange phrase. Avoid passive voice. Go through your story and mark passive phrases like "to be," "began to." We're from Texas and we're always fixing to do something. That's passive voice. And I tell you, not necessarily the words "fixing to," but he's beginning to, he's starting to, he's doing that. All those are passive voice. We've got to get rid of them. And I have to go through my writing and make sure those are all gone. They're boring. They don't paint a picture in the mind of people. A writer, I think she might be on here watching us, gave me this list of passive words to avoid using: am, is, are, it, was. These are all to be, basically to be verbs. And so you want to avoid using any of those. And often what I do is I go through my writing. Now, I'm not saying you have to get rid of them all, but you want to get rid of the majority of them. You go through here, and sometimes I just look for the word "was." Oftentimes "was" is a word that I misuse so often, and I can change it into a more active verb. It's a plain, crummy verb almost all the time, and I can change it to a better word. So do that. That's an exercise. Also look for filter words. Now, I was really unaware of this until a year or so ago when I didn't realize what was happening. But a filter word is a word that tells what the character is doing or thinking rather than showing it. So don't say the main character spotted a giraffe. We want to hear the giraffe crunch through the underbrush. So instead of saying Billy saw a giraffe, no, Billy is sitting there. We know that happens. Billy heard a crunch in the grass and looked up and saw a long neck and a mouth stretching toward him. That is more picturesque. Okay, something like that. Look for the types of words and eliminate them. Like he noticed something, he spotted something, he saw something, he realized something, he felt something, he thought something. I can't tell you how many times I had to take out. He thought, boy, this is horrible. No, it's not good writing. He wondered, he believed, he knew, he decided. Those are filter words that tell and not show. So look for those and try to eliminate them. Here's an interesting quote from C.S. Lewis on adjectives. Somebody, he wrote a lot of letters. This isn't from any book or anything. Somebody wrote him a letter and asked him a question, and so he wrote this back to them. Don't use adjectives which merely tell us how you want us to feel about the thing you're describing. I mean, instead of telling us a thing was terrible, describe it so we'll be terrified. Don't say it was delightful. Make us say delightful when we read the description. You see, all those words, horrifying, wonderful, hideous, exquisite, are only like saying to your readers, please, will you do my job for me? So that's what's happening there. You're asking the reader to imagine what's happening when you should be showing them. In other words, show, don't tell. Probably all of you have heard the phrase show, don't tell. That's I've been trying to describe to you how to get out of that, how to get out of show, don't, how to get into showing, not telling. So read through your story and ask yourself, am I telling the reader something that would be better described in action. Occasionally you do show, for instance, I don't know if I say this here, but sometimes, a big scene happened and then, he stormed out the door and went to the airport. Okay, that's showing. I mean, that's telling, but it's not important. It's not important that he, what he did while he went to the airport. That's right. You just want to get him somewhere. So sometimes in between scenes when you need to connect things together, yes, there is some telling. So sometimes you'll see that, and that's okay. In fact, I'd say that sometimes when you're in transition, after he took the flight, after the fight, he took the next plane out of town. Or maybe if it is important what happened, you would say after the fight, he hobbled to the curb, hailed a taxi, and wept buckets of tears on his way to the airport. Okay, so you can see it depends on what is important to your story. Was it important that he cried on the way to the airport? Or was it just you wanted to get him to the airport as quick as possible? So determine what you want to do in a particular scene. Eliminate almost all adverbs. I know when we were kids, our teachers taught us how to write adverbs, put adverbs and adjectives in sentences. And we thought that was wonderful. And our teacher thought it was wonderful typically. But in real writing, you hardly ever want to use, ever want to use an adverb. Stephen King is famous for saying, the road to hell is paved with adverbs. So, he said, don't eliminate as many as you can. So go through your manuscript, mark every adverb, particularly look for ly. And again, I do this. I do a search on ly and it tells me, okay, here's an ly. And I look very carefully. Can I do something in this spot instead of an ly word? Adverbs can almost always be eliminated. And here's another thing that recently I began to understand, and that is the setup and payoff kind of writing. Great stories are often like jokes, and all of us are familiar with jokes. So I'm going to tell a couple of jokes here. Like my wife said she missed me. Normally that's good, but she's reloading. Some people are so stupid. It's July 6th and people are still shooting fireworks. Some nearly caught my Christmas tree on fire. So the point here is you have a setup that's causing the mind to go to one location and your payoff takes them somewhere else. Can you see what's happening there in this joke? My wife says she missed me. Oh, isn't that sweet? Normally that'd be good, but now she's reloading. No, it changes what's happening. That's a setup and a payoff. It doesn't always have to be a joke, but here's another one I found recently. I kind of have to read it. I have no idea where he parked the car or why we exist. So again, the end is a twist. You have a setup that sets your mind thinking one thing, and the end is a twist. Now you have to plan for this. If you want your ending to be the twist, oftentimes you have to create something within your story that is the opposite of that twist. And that makes it interesting to the reader. Again, it depends on what you're writing. Another word, so I tried to find something that everybody would know about. So Back to the Future. There are dozens of setups and payoffs in Back to the Future and a number of movies, but this is one that I found. So at the beginning of Back to the Future, Marty is reading a flyer or something, and notice on the back of the flyer it says, "Save the clock." It seems to have nothing to do with the scene going on. There's nothing having to do about the clock. But what happens later in the movie? The clock became very important, didn't it? Because the save the clock told him what time the lightning was going to strike the clock, which allowed him to go back to the past, to the future. So it was it was a setup and a payoff. So you have to think of that. There's another famous sentence here that someone said, and I think it was a Russian writer, Chekhov, I think was his name. I can't remember. But anyway, he said, in a scene, if there's a revolver on the mantle in scene 1, then it has to be used by scene 3. So, and notice this in a movie. Notice this in anything that you watch. If you see a strange object or something odd within a scene, you know that that's going to come back later. It's just, you need to be thinking about that. That's how you write. You want to set something up in someone's mind that it's there, there's a possibility, I don't know what that's going to be used for, but later it's used for something, just like the clock. Another thing you could do is critique your location. And this was something I learned from a writer whose name was Dave Farland, I think. And he used to be a judge on a lot of writing contests. He read thousands of manuscripts. And one of the things he said was, one thing that made a manuscript sort of stand out or not stand out was the location that the person put that scene in. Don't be afraid to use a unique location. It's more interesting if your story takes place in the Arctic or in Paris or in deep space or in London or in New York than it does in Poughkeepsie. Now, there might be a reason you would want your story to be in Poughkeepsie, and then that would be okay. But typically, you want have you ever noticed in a lot of movies, particularly we watch a lot of detective movies and stuff, everybody lives in wonderful houses, almost always. They either live in a wonderful house or they live in a complete dump. Have you ever noticed? Hardly anybody lives in a 3-bedroom suburban house, a few occasionally, but the killer almost always lives in a McMansion or in a dump, because those are more interesting. And so you have to think of where am I putting my character? Not in some no-name Midwestern city, and maybe that's okay if that's part of the plot. So a unique location is usually a positive. Most people would rather be in the mind of your person in one of these places rather than so the first time I did this, I said rather than Mahia, Texas, and I got mad emails from someone who lived in Mahia. So forget about Mahia, turn it into Poughkeepsie. Notice how the protagonists, suspects, etc. often live in interesting houses. Okay, critique your main character. So we're going through that. We have critique time, and if you're a member of a critique group and you're reading other people's work, these are check boxes that you could look at in terms of looking at somebody else's writing. Is your main character likable but flawed? You don't want someone that you hate, but you don't want a perfect person either. And I think all of us can think of movie things that we watch and we like the people. Monk, for instance, what was Monk's flaw? He had OCD. And even in movies, the main character is often, somebody who's slightly bad, but better good. The good outweighs the bad. So there's flawed. You don't want to describe them in detail. Hair color is usually not important. How memorable they are to the reader is the importance. You can let the reader fill in the hair color or lack of, or whatever, but give them some quirk, a unique feature, some peculiar behavior. For example, Charlie Brown, he's likable, but he's so gullible. Lucy, on the other hand, has the ego of a whale. So imagine your character walks into this room, somebody who knows them, and they say to you, there's Bill. He is what? And what Bill is known for, that's what you want in your writing. You want people to say something about Bill when he walks into the room. He's so likable, but he's gullible, something like that. And we all know Charlie Brown, so I think you'll get that picture. All right. Now critique your story arc. Now, hopefully all of you know what a story arc is. You've all heard people say a story should have a beginning, middle, and end. And that's true for most commercial stories. Now, if you're writing literary fiction, oftentimes it's just like a vignette that doesn't really go anywhere. But for most commercial fiction, you want something that has a beginning, a middle, and the end. There's a book out there called Save the Cat, writes a novel. That's a good book to take a look at to see how this works. I took a course years ago from a guy by the name of Bob Banner. He was Mr. Television. He produced more for some of us who are old enough. We remember the Gary Moore show, the Carol Burnett show, Candid Camera. He produced all of those, and I was fortunate enough to take a course by him. And this is how. And you'll see this same structure in Save the Cat and in other places as well. Basically, you have at the very beginning, you have something called an inciting incident. Something happens that thrusts your character into something. Like, think of Harry Potter. What thrust him into the story? He got the letter, and then he got a visit from and then he went to the school, and so that was the inciting incident that led him to where he's going. Now he gets to school, and has all sorts of things going on. And oftentimes there's a mid-act crisis that may change something. He learned something that he didn't know before, and now that sets him off into sometimes a different direction, where he tries and tries and tries to solve the problem, and every time he fails and fails and fails. And in his final crisis, he fails so bad that there is no escape. Look at any Disney movie toward the end. What happens? They have failed so bad there is no escape, except somebody comes up with an idea or something happens, and that's called. And so you have a resolution here, and something some people call the obligatory scene and the resolution. Almost all Disney pictures and most Hollywood pictures follow this rule here, unless it's more of a literary kind of story. Critique the sellability of your story. Who is your audience? Is it written in an audience that will appear? Is it written in a voice that appeals to your audience? Go to Barnes and Noble and find a similar book on the shelf. Back when I wrote the first similar book of this Dreams book, I went to Barnes and Noble and I found where I thought it would be on the shelf. And I found 4 publishers that were publishing books on that shelf. I contacted all 4 publishers. 2 of them were interested in my book, and 1 of them published it. So that's what you want to do. You want to say, is there a market for this book? Find where it would be. If you write a book and you say, this book is so wonderful, there's nothing out there like it, then they're going to say, well, we can't sell it, because they can't take it into a bookstore and say, this is where it goes. There's no place like it. There's no place to put it. And so you're never going to sell a book like that. You have to fit into, unfortunately, you have to fit in some mold until you're very wealthy and well known. Finally, we come to the end, and that is, what is the secret sauce that makes your story so sellable, marketable, and a bestseller? So after you've done all those things, what is your secret sauce? I wish I knew. What made these into classics? To Kill a Mockingbird, Harry Potter, The Hunger Games, The Hobbit, and then there were none. There's no way to predict a winner, but there are ways to get your foot into the door. All of us have heard, make your own luck. So the way you make your own luck, the way you get your foot into the door, is to write a story in as excellent a way as you can. And then you have a chance of being discovered and becoming on that list. There's a few of these. I'm only going to go through this one here. Successful writing, this is David Farland's opinion. It transports the reader to another world. Characters feel like real people. Readers wait breathlessly for the outcome of the story's conflicts. Story contains powerful themes. Story must be engaging, evocative, appropriate for the theme. Get to the inciting incident. Remember that? Quickly and cleanly escalate and deepen from that point forward, and leave the reader satisfied. Again, this is the 3-act structure. And there's a couple more in here I'm not going to mention because I'm running out of time. So what will be your secret sauce? My opinion is that hard work is the first piece of the sauce. You have to read a lot. You have to write a lot. You have to do smart work. You have to deliberately learn a lot. You have to do these exercises. You have to go through and learn these pieces of the puzzle. You have to focus on the quality and excellence of your writing. You have to make sure that, we may not become a Wordsworth or a Rowling or something like that, but we can try to get close. We can get close in a voice and a rhythm and a texture and poetic diction that really stands out. You have to have patience and persistence, because you hear about the writers who write something, they become famous, but the vast majority of writers write and write and write and have to have patience before something happens. But you can make your own luck by networking, building relationships, teaming up with other writers, and so on. I see some of my other writer friends out there. Hi. Use your tricks wisely. So grab your writing notebook or your toolbox and go through it step by step. Again, how I mentioned, tool by tool. Don't try to check everything at once, but check them one at a time. And I think you're going to find that that's going to help you build a story that is going to have a lot more power to it than before. Now I have, if it's all, so I'm going to mention the book that that recently came out just a couple of weeks ago, just to get, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Hopefully I didn't screw up the story so much as I read them that you're not going to say, well, he didn't do what he said he was going to do, but nevertheless. This is a book of 365 short readings, inspiring stories meant to encourage and uplift. There's a wide variety of individuals in here. I'm going to show you just a couple that I think are interesting. It's about inventions and explorations in politics and culture and all these kind of things. Spotlights on the American success of people in a modern perspective and celebrates sort of our past accomplishments. So let me read one to you. This is, so as you can see, there's one a day. And this is just an example page. This is from January the 2nd. Anybody ever heard of a Broadway show called Hamilton?
Yes.
Okay. These stories are not about Hamilton. It's about how he got to Hamilton. So often these stories are not about the big deal, but how a person achieved getting to the big deal. So let's look at this. It starts out with a quote. This is from Maya Angelou. You may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated. In fact, it may be necessary to encounter the defeats so you can know who you are, what you can rise from, and how you can still come out of it. Lin-Manuel Miranda was born in New York City to Dr. Louis Towns Miranda, a clinical psychologist, and Luis Miranda Jr. The love of music consumed his heart. He listened to Broadway music constantly and went to Broadway shows when he could afford it. Then one day, after watching Disney's Little Mermaid, he sat down and began writing his own songs. He even named his son Sebastian after a character in the movie. Then Lin took a bold and life-changing step. He entered Connecticut's Wesleyan University to pursue a major in theater and film. Using his unique artistic voice, a mixture of his Spanish and Anglo heritage, he wrote his first musical called In the Heights from experiences in Upper Manhattan. It bombed. Lin backtracked, put his musical ambitions on hold, and took a job writing jingles for political candidates. But fate, luck, or providence intervened. With the help of some college friends, he reworked his musical. It was produced off-Broadway in 2007 and jumped up to the big time Broadway in 2009. In the Heights won 4 Tony Awards, including Best Musical. Success breeds opportunity. So Lin wrote another show about the history of the American Revolution. Hamilton opened in 2015 and has become one of the most phenomenal Broadway successes the world has ever seen. Consider this, for most success is not a direct path. There are ups and downs, but those who keep their eyes on their dream often find that their patience and persistence pays off. So those are the kinds of stories that are in here. And so where did this come from? There's a long story, but I'll just tell you a very short version. I was inspired by many years ago when I was reading about a Smithsonian collection, which is called The Beauty of Broken Objects. In this, broken pottery is restored by rejoining the pieces using something called golden glue. The Japanese art is called kintsugi, or golden joinery. Broken pieces are used to create something new and more beautiful. In the same way, people can rise above their broken lives and still do something worthy of acclaim, and we can learn from their examples. That was what sort of inspires this book here. We can look at people's lives, sometimes they're broken lives, but they put their pieces back together and did something that's worthwhile. Let me just read 1 or 2 more. And I chose this one because It is, oh, I shouldn't have to look. What day do you think this one is on? Why did I choose June 19th? And this is a one that all of us locally should, and all of the country should like. Opal Lee, the grandmother of Juneteenth. All men are created equal and are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, from the Declaration of Independence. The founders of the United States promised freedom for all people, but it took a while for this to become a reality, and in some cases, freedom is still not complete. Such was the case during the Civil War. On January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued a proclamation freeing the enslaved people in states that had seceded. As a result, formerly enslaved people were recognized as American citizens. But in reality, enslaved people were not really freed until Union forces took over an area. Such was the case in Texas. 2.5 years after Lincoln issued the proclamation, federal troops arrived in Galveston. On June 19, 1865, 2 months after the end of the war, U.S. General Gordon Granger issued a statement. The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. As the news spread, formerly enslaved people gathered in celebration. A year later, they celebrated Jubilee Day, now called Juneteenth, with music, prayer services, and parties. The day was mostly ignored by others until activists like Opal Lee decided to rectify that matter. At 89 years old, this former elementary school teacher decided to use her retirement to promote Juneteenth as a national holiday. For 5 years, she circulated petitions and staged marches, first in Fort Worth, then in Washington, D.C. Interest rose, and Juneteenth became more widely celebrated. Finally, in 2021, when Mrs. Opal was 94 years old, Congress designated June 19 as a national holiday. Opal Lee was present when President Joe Biden signed the legislation into law. Consider this: persistence and patience change things. A champion willing to fight for the right is always needed to make fundamental changes in any country, organization, or in a business. So I'm hoping that these stories are about a person, but they relate to other things we might be interested in. I'll skip this one, but this is the story of how 7-Eleven started. You might be interested. This one is sort of interesting. January the 5th. People, for some reason, some people get a kick out of this story, and we'll see what happens here. Sarah Blake, does anybody know who Sarah Blakely is? Anybody ever heard of her? One or two people? You'll know who she is in a minute. Sarah Blakely eliminates panty lines. Don't be intimidated by what you don't know. That can be your greatest strength and ensure that you do things differently than anyone else. Okay, women, you have a closet full of clothes, but you have a big problem: panty lines. Suffering the same issue, Sarah Blakely thought of a solution. She cut the feet off a pantyhose and voila, no panty lines, but they rolled up on her legs. Nevertheless, she knew she had a great idea. Using $5,000 from her savings, she started a company. She wrote her own patent application and played around with possible names. Believing memorable names had a K in them. Remember when I was talking about K as in writing? K is a word that people remember. She thought, oh, let me have a word with K in it because I like that word. She came up with Spanx with K in it. But while she was setting up her website, she changed it to Spanx, S-P-A-N-X, because she figured the spelling would be easier to protect. Her next problem was finding someone who would make her product. She personally visited every hosiery manufacturer in North Carolina, but none were interested until she got a call back. An owner had talked to his daughters, and they liked the idea. Now she needed to get into stores. It took her a while to get into Neiman Marcus, for example, to give Spanx a try. But when they did, they put it in the back where no one would see it. Blakely took action. She went to each Neiman Marcus store, pretended to be a salesperson without permission, and sold Spanx herself. She put Spanx sales cards on counters and gave gifts to the sales associates, from hosiery to gift wrap. In the process, they became her secret sales force. Neiman's found out about her stealthy plan. But when they looked at her great sales numbers, they urged her to continue. She also sent samples to Oprah, and surprise, she was invited to appear on Oprah's favorite show. In her first year, Sarah earned $4 million. And within 15 years, she was a billionaire when she sold her company. Consider this. There is no substitute for persistence, determination, and tireless work to get an idea off the ground and into the record books. There's determination, cleverness, sticking to it, just like Sarah Blakely. So that's what these stories are about. I hope that if you're interested in it, I have some of the books over here. You can order it online. I hope that all your dreams will then come true. And finally, I want to say, gosh, with all this information, you'll be a great writer soon. So thank you so much for being here.